In 1984, a criminal organization held an entire nation hostage, not with bombs, not with an army, with a box of candy. They kidnapped one of Japan's most powerful executives, released him, then told the police exactly what they planned to do next, and did it anyway. They sent letters mocking investigators by name. They poisoned grocery store shelves across the country. They collected ransoms, and then they disappeared. Forever. The case was never solved. The perpetrators were never identified. And to this day, no one knows who they were, where they went, or whether they are still alive. This is the story of the Glico Morinaga case. Japan in 1984 was a country in motion. The economic miracle was in full bloom. The streets of Osaka and Tokyo gleamed with prosperity. Department stores stacked their shelves with luxury goods. Salarymen worked 16-hour days and believed sincerely that the system would reward them. There was a sense of order in Japan that was almost architectural. Precise, layered, deeply felt. Crime existed, of course, but organized, brazen, sustained crime against major corporations, against the public, against the very idea of safety. That was something else. Japan's homicide rate was among the lowest in the developed world. Trust in institutions ran deep. People bought food from open shelves and never questioned whether something might be wrong with it. That trust was exactly what made Japan vulnerable. The corporations involved were not obscure. Ezaki Glico was one of the most beloved confectionery companies in the country, famous for Pocky, the chocolate-coated biscuit sticks that had become a cultural symbol. Morinaga, house foods, Marudai ham. These were household names, companies that children associated with birthdays and celebrations and the simple pleasure of a treat after school. Whoever chose these targets understood something important. They understood that attacking a beloved brand was not just an attack on a company, it was an attack on innocence. And they planned it for a very long time. The night of March 18, 1984. It is just past 11 o'clock when two masked men break into the home of Katsuhisa Ezaki in Nishinomiya, a quiet residential city in Hyogo Prefecture. Ezaki is the president of Glico, one of the most recognizable names in Japanese industry. He is 52 years old. He has a family. He has a life built on decades of work and reputation. The men bind him. They blindfold him. They take him from his home in the night. His wife and daughter are also restrained and locked in a room. They are not harmed. But the message is clear. This is controlled. This is planned. These men know exactly what they are doing. Ezaki is driven to a warehouse in Ibaraki City in Osaka Prefecture. He is locked in a steel cage. A ransom demand arrives shortly after. 1 billion yen in cash, along with 100 kilograms of gold. The family contacts police. Negotiations begin. The clock is ticking. Then something unexpected happens. 3 days after his abduction, Katsuhisa Ezaki escapes. He finds an unlocked door in the warehouse. He does not wait. He does not look back. He runs. The kidnappers have vanished before police can move in. No arrests are made. The ransom was never paid. Most people assumed it was over. It was not over. It had barely begun. On April 10, 1984, 3 weeks after the failed kidnapping, a car is found burning in a Glico parking lot. Inside the vehicle, investigators find evidence linking it to the abduction. This is troubling, but not yet catastrophic. Then Glico receives a letter. The letter threatens the company. It warns that products have been contaminated. Glico makes the difficult decision to pull its products from shelves across Western Japan. This costs the company over 6 billion yen in losses. Factories shut down. Thousands of workers are temporarily laid off. The damage to the brand is immediate and severe. No contaminated products are found, but the fear has already done its work. Then, in May of 1984, a letter arrives at a media outlet. It is signed with a name that will haunt Japan for years. The Kaikinsha Dokubutsu Dan. Translated, the Mystery Phantom Crime Group. But they gave themselves a simpler name in their correspondence. They called themselves the Monster with 21 Faces, a reference to the fictional master criminal from the beloved Edogawa Rampo detective novels. They were not just criminals. They were performing. They wanted an audience. They wanted to be feared and, in some dark way, admired. The letters that followed were extraordinary. They were written in a confident, mocking tone. They named police officers directly. They ridiculed investigators' efforts. They provided details that proved they were watching. One letter, addressed to the Osaka Prefectural Police, read something to the effect of, "We are not monsters. You are the ones who make us this way." The tone was theatrical, almost playful, which made it far more unsettling than simple threats. In June of 1984, they moved beyond Glico. They announced that they had placed poisoned candy on store shelves throughout the Kinki region, and this time they had. Police and company representatives fanned out across supermarkets, convenience stores, and pharmacies. They found packages of candy that had been carefully opened, laced with potassium cyanide, and resealed, placed back on shelves where any child might pick them up. The poison was real. The threat was real. Morinaga candies, house foods products, Marudai ham. One by one, companies received extortion letters demanding money in exchange for the guarantee that their products would not be targeted. Japan's supermarkets began pulling entire product lines. Parents stopped buying packaged snacks. The economy around confectionery and processed food began to collapse in measurable ways. And through it all, the monster with 21 faces continued to write. The investigation into the Glico Morinaga case was one of the largest in post-war Japanese history. The National Police Agency assigned hundreds of officers. The Osaka and Hyogo prefectural police departments poured resources into the case. Task forces were assembled. Tip lines received thousands of calls. Surveillance operations were mounted near supermarkets and drop points. One of the most haunting moments in the investigation came in August of 1984, when police came extraordinarily close to catching the group. A ransom drop had been arranged with Morinaga. Undercover officers staked out the location. They spotted a man behaving suspiciously near a drop point, a man described as middle-aged, with a prominent jawline and slightly unusual features. Officers moved in. The man vanished. A high-speed chase ensued through the streets of Kyoto. The suspect's vehicle, a white Toyota, raced through intersections, navigated narrow streets, and disappeared. Despite having helicopter support and dozens of ground units, police lost him. The near miss devastated the investigation. A composite sketch was drawn from witnesses' descriptions. It would become one of the most circulated images in Japan. The man in the sketch became known as the Kitsune-me no Otoko, the fox-eyed man, for his sharp, distinctive eyes. Thousands of people claimed to have seen him. None of the leads were conclusive. The investigation dragged into 1985. The letters kept coming. Each one was a reminder that the monster with 21 faces was still out there, still watching, still in control of the narrative. Then, in the summer of 1985, something changed. The superintendent of the Shiga Prefectural Police, a senior official named Yamamoto, became the subject of a campaign by the group after a subordinate officer's actions during a surveillance operation drew public criticism. The group, sensing an opportunity to embarrass law enforcement, sent letters targeting him specifically. On August 7, 1985, Yamamoto set himself on fire at his offices in Shiga Prefecture. He died from his injuries. It was never conclusively proven that the monster with 21 faces directly caused his death. But the timing was devastating. The pressure on investigators was immense. The sense that this criminal enterprise could reach into the highest levels of Japanese law enforcement and draw blood, that was not lost on anyone. Shortly after Yamamoto's death, the monster with 21 faces sent one final letter. It said, in effect, "We are letting the police off the hook. We have won. It is no longer interesting." And then they were gone. The letters stopped. The poisonings stopped. The threats stopped. Like a tide going out. Here is where the case becomes something more than a crime story. Because the evidence police assembled over more than a year of intense investigation should, by any reasonable standard, have produced an arrest. Police collected hundreds of letters, all handwritten in a distinctive style, with grammar and vocabulary suggesting a highly educated author. Linguistic analysis pointed toward someone from the Kinki region, likely with a background in chemistry or pharmacology. The cyanide used to contaminate the products was traced to a specific type used in electroplating, a common industrial process in the Osaka region. The packaging used to reseal the poisoned products showed precise, practiced technique. Phone calls made by the group during ransom negotiations were traced to phone booths across the Kinki region, suggesting the group was local and mobile, with multiple members capable of acting independently. And yet, no fingerprints that could be matched, no witnesses who could be confirmed, no informants who came forward with usable intelligence. The statute of limitations for extortion in Japan, the primary charge that applied to most of the group's crimes, expired in 1994. The case, legally speaking, was over. The monster with 21 faces could have walked into a police station and confessed and faced no prosecution for most of their crimes. No one ever did. In 2000, Japanese authorities released a new analysis of DNA found on a stamp licked on one of the envelopes. They believed they had a DNA profile. It led nowhere. The identity of the fox-eyed man remains unknown. The number of people involved in the operation remains unknown. The motive remains, at its deepest level, unknown. We have to stop and sit with that for a moment. Because behind the letters and the chases and the composite sketches, there were real people whose lives were shattered by what happened. Katsuhisa Ezaki, the kidnapping victim, survived his ordeal. He was held for 3 days in a steel cage. 3 days in the dark, not knowing if his family was safe, not knowing whether the men who took him intended to kill him. He was found by chance and escaped by nerve. He returned to lead Glico. But the experience of those 3 days, the cage, the dark, the uncertainty, those do not simply leave a person. His family endured something different. His wife and daughter were locked in a room in their own home and left there while strangers took their husband and father into the night. The home that should have been their safest place became the site of their worst memory. For the employees of Glico, Morinaga, and the other targeted companies, the psychological weight was enormous. Thousands of workers were furloughed when products were pulled from shelves. Some companies never fully recovered the market trust they had built over decades. The damage was financial, yes, but it was also something harder to quantify. A sense that the place you worked, the product you made, the brand you represented, had been weaponized against the very people you served. For parents across Japan, The summer of 1984 was defined by a specific kind of fear. The fear that the candy in your child's hand might kill them. Parents stopped buying packaged snacks. Children were told not to eat anything that a parent hadn't personally inspected. Stores locked confectionery behind glass. The innocent act of giving a child a sweet became fraught with terror. Think about what that does to a society. The trust that holds everyday life together, the assumption that a product on a shelf is safe, that the world is not actively trying to harm your child. That trust, once broken, does not simply repair itself. It seeps back slowly, over years, and it leaves a scar. Retailers who had been in the grocery business their entire lives said they had never experienced anything like the silence in their stores during those months. Shelves that were normally stripped bare by the weekend would stand full. Entire categories of food that Japanese families had bought without thinking for generations, suddenly untouchable. One detail stands out above all others. There are no confirmed deaths directly linked to the poisoned products. Not because the poison wasn't real. The cyanide was real. The tampering was confirmed. The intent was unambiguous. The reason there were no deaths is that the warnings reached the public in time. Police and companies moved quickly enough. Parents were frightened enough to act. The monster with 21 faces poisoned the shelves of Japan, and, through the very terror they created, may have inadvertently prevented the mass casualty event they seemed to be engineering. Whether that was intentional, whether they wanted fear without death, is one of the many questions that will never be answered. The families of workers who were laid off during the Glico shutdown, the supermarket owners who watched their businesses suffer, the parents who spent sleepless summers checking expiration dates and seal integrity on every package, none of them ever received an explanation. None of them ever saw justice. They never got to look the fox-eyed man in the eye and ask him why. Over the decades, investigators and criminologists have proposed several theories about the identity and motive of the monster with 21 faces. None have been proven. All contain pieces that fit. The first theory is that the group was connected to organized crime, specifically to a faction of the Yakuza operating in the Osaka region. The Kinki area in the early 1980s was home to some of Japan's most powerful criminal syndicates. The precision of the operation, the ability to source industrial-grade cyanide, the sophisticated logistics of the ransom demands and the poisonings, all of these suggest resources and infrastructure that a small, independent group would struggle to assemble. Some investigators have noted that the ransom demands, while large, were not enormous by organized crime standards. The theory holds that this was a financially motivated operation run by professionals, possibly with internal expertise in chemistry and surveillance. The theatrical letters under this theory were designed to confuse, to make police look for an eccentric loner when they should have been looking at criminal organizations. The counter-argument is that the Yakuza had, by 1984, developed a complex if uneasy relationship with corporate Japan, and a sustained assault on major corporations would have disrupted that arrangement in ways that benefited no one in organized crime. The second theory centers on a disgruntled former employee of one of the targeted companies, or someone with a personal grievance against the food industry. The knowledge of packaging techniques shown in the tampering suggests someone familiar with food manufacturing. The specific targeting of Glico first, before expanding, might indicate a personal grudge against that company in particular. The letters, under this theory, were the work of someone highly intelligent and deeply resentful. Someone who had spent years planning a very specific revenge. The references to fictional detectives, the theatrical self-naming, the contempt for police. These could all be the expressions of a person who felt they had been overlooked, cheated, or humiliated, and wanted the world to see how capable they really were. This theory is supported in part by the linguistic analysis of the letters, which suggested a single primary author rather than multiple writers, someone with a consistent individual voice. The third theory, and in some ways the most unsettling, is that the monster with 21 faces was a small, ideologically motivated group with no conventional criminal objective. Their demands for money were real, but under this theory, money was secondary. What they wanted was disruption. They wanted to prove that Japan's corporate establishment was fragile, that the trust that held consumer society together could be unraveled by a few people willing to act without constraint. The references to the Edogawa Rampo villain, the theatrical letters, the decision to announce their retirement once they felt they had won, all of this suggests people who saw themselves as making a point, not just committing crimes. Some analysts have drawn parallels to radical political movements of the 1960s and 1970s in Japan, many of which had faded by the 1980s, but left ideological residue in a generation of disillusioned activists. Under this theory, the group chose corporate targets not at random, but as symbols. Glico Morinaga. These were not just candy companies. They were emblems of the post-war economic order, of a Japan that had traded something in pursuit of prosperity. None of these theories has been confirmed. The fox-eyed man has never been identified. The DNA on the envelope has never been matched. The monster with 21 faces remains exactly what they named themselves: a mystery. Here is what stays with you when you spend time with this case. In most unsolved crimes, the frustration comes from a lack of evidence. The trail goes cold. The witnesses disappear. Time destroys what little existed. The Glico Morinaga case is different. There was evidence. There were letters, hundreds of them. There were phone calls. There were eyewitnesses. There was a DNA sample. There was a near capture on the streets of Kyoto. There was a composite sketch distributed to an entire nation. And still, nothing. Which means one of two things. Either the people responsible were so disciplined, so intelligent, and so careful that they outmaneuvered one of the largest police investigations in Japanese history at every single turn. Or the answers are somewhere in those letters, in that DNA profile, in that composite sketch. And something, or someone, kept the investigation from finding them. Japan sealed the full investigative files. Some documents remain classified. The reasons given are procedural. The questions they leave behind are not. An entire country spent more than a year living in fear of its own grocery stores. A company president spent 3 days in a cage. A senior police official died. And whoever was responsible went home, put down their pen, and lived the rest of their lives in silence. Perhaps they are gone now. Perhaps they died with their secret. Perhaps they are still out there, somewhere in Japan, old and quiet, and they remember everything. The world is full of cases like this one. Cases where the crime was real and documented and devastating, and where the people responsible simply vanished back into the fabric of ordinary life. Next week, we cross to a different continent, a different decade, and a crime that baffled investigators for an entirely different reason. One that forces you to ask not just who did it, but whether the system ever really wanted to find out. The files stay cold. The questions stay open. Subscribe to Cold Files Global, so when the next case drops, you're already there.